The snow didn't just fall, it screamed across the Colorado tracks, burial ground for a secret that was supposed to stay frozen forever. Special Agent Elena Vance watched as her K9, Atlas, tore at a mound of ice, his claws unearthing a blood-stained Navy jacket, the same one belonging to Liam Miller, a SEAL declared dead months ago. Inside the hollow, Liam lay broken, a warrior reduced to a shadow, betrayed by the very blood he swore to protect. The truth isn't just heartbreaking. It's a war crime committed in a family home. Please subscribe to the channel and follow this journey to the very end. Tell me which city you are watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The wind howled like a wounded animal through the abandoned industrial corridor of Maple Creek. It was the kind of cold that didn't just bite the skin, it looked for the soul. Special Agent Elena Vance pulled her collar higher, her breath clouding the air in frantic rhythmic bursts as she followed the heavy rhythmic thud of Atlas's paws hitting the frozen earth. The Malinois wasn't just tracking, he was hunting something that the rest of the world had already buried and forgotten. "Atlas, slow down!" Elena rasped, her voice splintering in the sub-zero air, but the dog ignored the command, his ears pinned back, his body a low-slung engine of desperate intent. He stopped near the rusted signal post of the old railroad, a place where the steel tracks cut through the dark like the scars of an old betrayal. Atlas began to dig, not with curiosity, but with a frantic, primal urgency that made the hair on the back of Elena's neck stand upright. "What is it, boy? What did you find?" she whispered, her hand instinctively hovering near her sidearm. The dog let out a sharp, piercing bark that echoed off the frozen factory walls. Then he shoved his snout into a hollow beneath the rails and pulled. A flash of military-grade fabric appeared beneath the sleet. It was a dark, heavy jacket, stained with something that hadn't quite turned to ice. Elena knelt, her flashlight beam cutting through the white fury. It wasn't just a jacket. Liam Miller, the Navy SEAL who had been officially declared lost at sea during a classified deployment 3 months ago, was lying in the dirt. His skin was the color of wood ash. His lips were cracked and blue, his eyes staring at a sky he could no longer see. "Liam? Liam? Can you hear me?" Elena demanded, her fingers searching for a pulse against the icy grit of his neck. The beat was there, faint, erratic, like a bird trapped behind a stone wall. He groaned, a sound that was less of a human voice and more of a ghost rattling its chains. "Dad, is Dad home yet?" he mumbled, his mind drifting through a childhood that had been sold to the highest bidder. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew this man, or at least she knew the legend of him. "I've got you, Liam. Stay with me. Do you hear me? That's an order," she shouted over the roar of the storm. She stripped off her own thermal coat, wrapping it around his shivering, emaciated frame. He was a shadow of the warrior he used to be, his ribs jutting out like the hull of a wrecked ship. "The house. The papers. Julian said it was for my care," Liam whispered, his eyelids fluttering as the heat from Atlas's body began to seep into his frozen limbs. Elena froze. Julian Miller was the one who had signed the death certificates, the one who had cashed the government checks and sold the family estate while Liam was supposedly rotting in a foreign grave. "He left you here, didn't he?" Elena asked, her voice trembling with a sudden sharp clarity. "Your own brother left you in the dark." Liam didn't answer. His head fell back against her arm, his breathing becoming a shallow, whistling rhythm of survival. "Atlas, guard!" Elena commanded. She hoisted Liam's dead weight, his body feeling dangerously light, stripped of the muscle and fire that had once made him a Navy SEAL. The drive to Maple Creek General was a blur of white-knuckle steering and silent prayers. Every time she glanced in the rear view, she saw Atlas curled against Liam, his amber eyes fixed on the man's face. Inside the emergency room, the chaos was immediate. Nurses rushed forward, their scrubs glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. Male, mid-30s, extreme hypothermia, malnourishment, possible internal trauma? Elena barked, her FBI credentials hitting the desk with a heavy metallic thud. Dr. Benton appeared, his eyes widening as he recognized the name on the intake form. "Liam Miller? We were told he died in theater," the doctor muttered, his hands already moving to check the man's vitals. "He was murdered in theater. Someone just forgot to finish the job." Elena snapped, her gaze fixed on the trauma room door. She sat in the waiting room for hours, the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee filling her lungs. Atlas sat beside her, his head on her boot, his ears twitching at every distant siren. When Benton finally emerged, he looked like a man who had seen too many winters. "He's alive, but it's a miracle," Benton said quietly. "Another 3 hours in that snow, and we'd be talking to the coroner instead of you." "Can he talk?" Elena asked. She needed the truth before the trail went cold. "His mind is fractured, Agent. He's been through a psychological meat grinder," Benton replied. Elena stood up, her jaw tightening. She didn't need him to talk yet. She had enough. She walked to the hospital window, watching the snow fall softer now, as if the world was trying to cover its tracks. She pulled out her phone, dialing a number that would wake up the regional office. "This is Special Agent Vance. I need a full forensic audit on Julian Miller and Arcadia Realty Group. And I found the seal," she whispered, her eyes tracking a lone car driving too fast down Main Street. "And I think we just uncovered a grave for a living man." She looked back at Atlas, whose tail gave a single hollow tap against the linoleum. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning, and this time, the war was coming home to Maple Creek. Part 2. Elena Vance did not take her eyes off the emergency room doors. Her hand gripped Atlas's lead as if searching for an anchor amidst the storm of rage surging within her. "I need every single record on Julian Miller right now," she roared into her phone. Her voice was splintered with fury and a visceral loathing for a man who could leave his own brother to rot in the freezing snow. There was a heartbeat of silence on the other end, before the frantic clacking of a keyboard broke through the heavy, antiseptic-laden air of Maple Creek General. Dr. Benton emerged, his face lined and weary like the very land itself after a long, brutal winter. He gave a small, solemn nod, signaling that Liam had passed the critical point, though his soul remained trapped somewhere between the battlefield and that dark, hollow pit. "He forged his signature, didn't he?" Elena asked. Her eyes flashed with fire as she looked at the flimsy, forged medical records Julian had used to declare Liam mentally incompetent. Benton sighed, handing her a stack of property transfer documents moving the Miller estate to Arcadia Realty. Every single page bore Julian's signature as the sole legal guardian. He didn't just steal the money. He's erasing Liam's very existence from this world, Elena hissed. She felt a low tremor from Atlas, the Malinois tracking his nose toward the end of the hallway as if catching the scent of a traitor. The roar of a high-end engine outside the hospital entrance cut through her thoughts. It was Julian Miller's polished SUV, and he stepped out with a smug, practiced grin, completely unaware that the prey he thought was dead was beginning to wake up. Elena stepped into the lobby, blocking his path with a gaze as cold as a Colorado frost. She said nothing, merely holding up the tattered, blood-stained jacket that Atlas had unearthed. "This. How do you have this?" Julian stammered. The smirk on his face twisted and vanished, revealing the raw panic of a killer backed into a corner. "Liam is alive, Julian, and he has a lot to say about the care you've provided him over the last 3 months," Elena said, her voice dropping into a lethal, steady cadence. Atlas let out a guttural, tectonic growl, ready to tear into the man who had hurt the soldier he had just pulled from the grave. Julian recoiled, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his car keys. "You have no evidence of anything," he shouted, but his voice cracked with terror as he saw the small USB drive Elena was slowly spinning between her fingertips. "This is everything he hid in his pocket before you left him for dead," Elena said, her voice a whisper of impending judgment. "The game is over, Julian. And now you're going to pay for every breath Liam had to fight for. Titi, is there a specific part of the evidence on that USB drive you'd like me to focus on for the next chapter of the investigation?" Julian's face blanched to the color of bone as he retreated toward the glass doors. The smug businessman was gone, replaced by a frantic animal realizing the cage was closing. Elena didn't move an inch, her hand anchored to Atlas's harness. The K9's low, tectonic growl was the only sound in the lobby, a vibration that seemed to count down the seconds of Julian's freedom. "You think that drive holds anything real?" Julian rasped, his voice cracking like thin ice. "I built this family's legacy while Liam was off playing hero in the dirt. I earned every cent of that estate." "You didn't build a legacy, Julian. You built a tomb," Elena countered, her voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register that made the hospital staff pause in their tracks. Suddenly, Julian's panic took a sharper, more desperate turn. He didn't reach for his keys, but for a burner phone in his breast pocket, his fingers trembling as he hit a speed dial. "Melissa, it's me. They found him. They have the drive," he shouted into the receiver, ignoring the stunned stares of the nurses. The silence on the other end was brief before a feminine, cold voice filtered through the speaker, loud enough for Elena to hear. "I told you to be clean, Julian. Now you're a liability." The line went dead, and the realization hit Julian like a physical blow. He wasn't the partner in this crime. He was the fall man. "She's going to kill me," Julian whispered, his eyes darting toward the darkness of the parking lot. "She doesn't leave witnesses. Did Elena, not even her business partners." Elena stepped forward, her FBI badge catching the harsh overhead light. "Then give me the location of the offshore servers, Julian. Give me the names, and I can protect you from her." He hesitated, his breathing coming in shallow, frantic gasps. But before he could speak, a faint, metallic clink echoed from the ventilation duct above them. Atlas snapped his head upward, a sharp, urgent bark erupting from his throat as he lunged toward the center of the lobby. "Get down!" Elena screamed, throwing her weight into Julian as the first scent of gasoline and smoke began to pour through the vents. The lights flickered and died, plunging the hospital into a terrifying red-tinted emergency glow. The smell of a deliberate chemical fire was unmistakable. Julian was sobbing now, his bravado completely evaporated into the soot-heavy air. "She's here. Melissa's already here to burn it all down." Elena gripped her sidearm, her eyes searching the shadows for the silhouette of the woman who had traded a soldier's life for a payout. The smoke thickened, a gray-white veil that tasted of ash and betrayal. Liam was still sedated in the trauma room, defenseless against the rising heat. "Atlas, find the source! Go!" Elena commanded. The K9 disappeared into the haze, his paws sliding on the linoleum as he raced toward the heart of the fire. Arya didn't look at the fleeing Julian. She looked toward the trauma ward, where the man she had pulled from the snow was about to be sacrificed again. "Not on my watch," she hissed through the smoke. "I'm not losing another soldier to your greed." The smoke didn't just crawl. It conquered the hallway, a gray-white veil that tasted of ash and chemical betrayal. Elena Vance gripped her sidearm, her eyes searching the flickering emergency red light for the silhouette of the woman who had traded a SEAL's life for a payout. "Julian, move! To the trauma ward now!" Elena bellowed over the rising roar of the fire. Julian was sobbing, his once pristine shirt now wrinkled and gray with soot. He looked like a man who had finally realized his cut of the money was just the price of his own funeral. "She's here. Melissa's already here to burn it all down," he shrieked, his voice cracking like thin ice under the weight of his terror. Atlas snapped his head toward the end of the corridor, a sharp, urgent bark erupting from his throat as he sensed a predator moving through the haze. "Atlas, guard the door!" Elena commanded. She lunged into Liam's room just as a shadow detached itself from the smoke near the oxygen tanks. Melissa Ward stepped into the red glow, her auburn hair still perfectly tied in a sleek bun, her eyes cold and entirely fearless despite the chaos she had ignited. "You should have let him stay in the snow, Agent," Melissa whispered, her voice smooth and sharp like a scalpel. "It was a cleaner ending for everyone. Now you're just making the cleanup messy." Elena didn't waste breath on a reply. She saw Melissa's hand dive toward her coat pocket and reacted with the instinct of a woman who had spent a lifetime chasing monsters. She tackled the woman into the medical equipment, the crashing of metal and glass echoing like a heartbeat against the crackle of the fire. "Liam, wake up! You have to move!" Elena shouted, her shoulder pinning Melissa against the wall, even as the taller woman clawed at her face. Liam's eyelids fluttered, his hand reaching out blindly for the sister he thought was still missing, but finding only the heat of the encroaching flames. "Dad, is the workshop burning?" he mumbled, his mind a fractured mirror of the trauma that had broken his spirit. Atlas let out a terrifying guttural roar, his teeth locking onto the sleeve of Melissa's coat as she tried to reach for a hidden blade. "Get him out of here, Atlas! Go!" Elena screamed. She felt the floorboards begin to groan under the intense heat. The K9 didn't hesitate. He clamped his jaws on Liam's hospital gown and began to pull with everything he had, dragging the SEAL toward the only exit left. Melissa laughed, a bitter, broken sound that chilled Elena to the marrow. "You think saving him changes anything?" she hissed, staring into Elena's eyes. "I've already cycled the funds. Arcadia is a ghost, and Julian is a dead man walking." Suddenly, a massive boom shook the hospital. A beam overhead surrendered to the fire, crashing down between Elena and the door. The separation was absolute. Elena was trapped in the inferno with the woman who had orchestrated it all, while Liam and Atlas, the burning ceiling, groaned as the structural beam slammed into the floor, separating Elena from her exit and trapping her in a cage of swirling orange embers and toxic white smoke. Melissa Ward stood on the other side of the fire, her silhouette flickering like a demon against the wall of heat. her laughter a chilling contrast to the crackle of the inferno. "You chose to be a hero, Agent Vance, but heroes are just people who don't know when to walk away from a losing hand," Melissa hissed, her voice cutting through the roar of the fire like a serrated blade. Elena didn't waste a second on words. She lunged through the gap in the flames, her shoulder connecting with Melissa's chest as the two women crashed into the tiled floor. The heat was suffocating, a physical weight that pressed against Elena's lungs, but her hands were steady as she pinned Melissa's wrists to the floor. "The funds are already gone, Elena. Arcadia is a ghost, and Julian is a dead man walking," Melissa screamed, her composure finally shattering as the fire licked at her silk coat. Outside the trauma ward, Atlas let out a terrifying, guttural roar, his teeth locking onto Liam's hospital gown as he dragged the semi-conscious Seal through the thickening haze toward the emergency exit. Liam's mind was a fractured mirror, reflecting the flames of the workshop where his father had died a decade ago. He was reliving the betrayal, the cold, and the darkness all at once. "Hannah, I can't find home, Ethan," Liam mumbled, his voice a fractured whisper of a man who had lost his way in a war that followed him to his own doorstep. Atlas barked once, a sharp, authoritative command that seemed to anchor Liam to the present. The dog's body heat was a lifeline, a primal reminder that he wasn't alone in the ash. Back in the inferno, Elena felt the floor beneath her shudder as the secondary oxygen tanks in the hallway began to overheat. She had seconds before the entire wing became a crater. "Tell me where the keys are, Melissa. Give me the offshore access codes, or we both burn in this room," Elena roared, her face grimy with soot, her eyes burning with a lethal focus. Melissa stared at her, a twisted, defiant grin spreading across her lips. "I'd rather see the money burn than give it to a woman who thinks justice is real." She lunged for the hidden blade in her sleeve, but Elena was faster, her fist connecting with Melissa's jaw in a strike honed by years of field combat. The woman went limp as the fire roared upward. Elena grabbed the metallic drive from Melissa's pocket, the weight of the evidence feeling like lead in her hand. She hauled the unconscious woman toward the only window left intact. The glass shattered under the force of a chair Elena hurled through it, and the sudden rush of cold night air was a shock to her scorched lungs. She tumbled onto the snow-covered lawn just as the trauma ward erupted in a spectacular blossom of orange and black. The shock wave threw her forward, face first into the freezing slush. Atlas was there in an instant, his fur singed but his eyes bright and steady as he nudged Elena's shoulder, his tail giving a single frantic wag. Liam sat propped against a nearby police cruiser, his face pale but his eyes finally beginning to clear as the sirens of the FBI and Internal Affairs drowned out the roar of the fire. Agent Carter Reynolds approached, his hard face softened by weary eyes as he looked at the ruins of the hospital wing. "We got the call, Vance. We've been tracking Ward's shell companies for months, but we needed the link to the SEAL deployment." Elena handed him the drive, her hands still shaking with the adrenaline of the escape. "It's all in there. The payments, the coordinates, and the proof that Julian Miller wasn't the only one selling his soul." Julian was already on his knees in the snow nearby, hands behind his head, his once smug face a mask of absolute hollow defeat as the handcuffs clicked into place. "I did it for us, Liam. I kept the house standing," Julian shrieked, his voice cracking with the desperation of a man who had realized he was the one who had truly lost everything. Liam looked at his brother, not with anger, but with a profound, quiet pity that was far more cutting than any weapon. "You didn't keep the house, Julian. You turned it into a grave." Spring arrived late to Maple Creek that year, the last of the snow melting in thin silver veins to reveal the blackened soil of the old workshop. Scaffolds rose where ruin had been, the rhythmic hum of tools filling the morning air as the Pierce construction sign was finally hoisted back into place. Liam stood on the new porch, his shoulders finally at rest as he leaned against a wooden beam, watching Atlas play in the tall grass with a group of new K-9 recruits. The fire had taken the lies, but it had left the foundation, and with Elena's help, the ghost sniper had finally found the way home. Julian was sentenced to 20 years in a federal facility, his charm and arrogance burned away by the reality of a cell. Melissa Ward was still a ghost, but her empire was a pile of ash. Liam looked down at the scarred Malinois who had found him in the snow, reaching down to ruffle the dog's ears as a soft smile finally broke across his face. "We're home now, buddy," he whispered, the words no longer a plea, but a promise that would never be broken again. Redemption doesn't start in the light. It begins in the ruins where faith chooses to rebuild what the world tried to burn, and Liam Miller was finally a man who remembered how to live, disappeared into the blinding white light of the exit,